Chapter 12. Georgiana draped her pelisse over the back of a chair and placed her gloves, hat and reticule on the table beside it. Everything else had been stored away in her travelling case, or was tucked under the seat in the carriage, just waiting for their departure. Excitement and fear warred within her as she anticipated her trip to Netherfield. "I'm afraid my brother is not home," she said, after greeting the people gathered in the drawing-room. "However, I do expect him to return at any moment." "Oh, I'm certain we can wait as long as needed," Caroline Bingley said sweetly. Before stepping into the drawing-room, Georgiana had heard Caroline complaining to her brother about having to wait. "I'm sure you're anxious to return to Netherfield," Mrs. Annesley said. Caroline raised a disapproving brow at the mere servant who deigned to speak and made no reply. Georgiana bristled at the dismissive action. "I know I am all anticipation at the prospect of finally seeing Netherfield. I have heard so much about it." Indeed, she had heard plenty about the rooms and gardens from Jane, Elizabeth and Bingley, with a smattering of details thrown in by her brother. Of course, most of the things he mentioned, such as the library, were for Bingley to consider as needing improvement. Once Fitzwilliam had renewed his determination to see his friend well settled in an estate, he had taken it upon himself to draw up a list of items to which he thought Bingley should see. Bingley had been eager to listen and learn, of course, while Jane and Elizabeth had preferred to answer Georgiana's questions about the more homely items of furnishing and fabrics. "You will simply adore it," Caroline cooed. "Do you?" Georgiana asked pointedly. "Do I adore Netherfield?" Caroline asked with wide eyes. "Yes. Do you adore Netherfield? I know that Miss Bennet and Miss Elizabeth both speak highly of it, but until this moment I have not heard you praise it at all." Caroline lifted her chin. "You have not been home to callers enough for me to speak to you about such things." The bitterness in her voice was plain to all. "I do apologise, but I have been out." A sour look settled on Caroline's face. "Of course," she sighed. "Miss Bennet and Miss Elizabeth have very little with which to compare Netherfield, so they will naturally be more impressed than I am. I've seen Pemberley after all, and Pemberley is an estate without an equal. Be that as it may, Netherfield's gardens are appropriately sized and styled. They are neither grand nor ostentatious. They are appropriate to the grandeur of the house and do not detract from it." Georgiana smiled and muttered her agreement that simple, dignified gardens were what she preferred. "The house is impressive. There are none that outshine it in the immediate area. The next largest home is Longbourn." Her lips curled in derision. "And Longbourn is of no great beauty. It has a very small park, and—" She shook her head and lowered her voice. "It is not well tended." "Caroline," Bingley snapped, "Longbourn is a fine estate. It is not so large as Netherfield, but I will not have you disparaging our neighbours." Caroline's lips pursed and her eyes narrowed. "Our neighbours are much like their estate, of no great beauty and not very well tended. The youngest Bennets." She shook her head. "And their mother. I don't know why you would wish to tie yourself to such a family." "Indeed?" Georgiana's brows rose, as she turned amused eyes to Bingley. He had mentioned how his sister was not pleased about returning to Netherfield, or his plans to marry Jane. He had already acquired Mr. Bennet's permission, and was merely waiting to make his offer, and present her with his Fay-Day ring. But it was surprising to hear Caroline speak so freely. "Are they so bad? My brother has not said they are." She knew how Bingley and her brother had described the rest of the Bennet family, as well as the cautioning that Elizabeth had given her about her mother and sisters. Enthusiastic, a touch unrefined, but pleasant, he responded, with a glare for his sister. And well enough bred to not speak of their neighbours in such a demeaning fashion. But then, you are not a gentleman's daughter, so perhaps that is why your civility is lacking. Caroline huffed. Georgiana's eyes grew wide at Bingley's open and harsh reprimand. "Civility is not a mark of birth, but of character," Mrs. Annesley added, drawing a look of absolute loathing from Caroline. "My brother should be returning soon," Georgiana repeated. "He had a particular errand to which he needed to attend." Caroline huffed again. "I cannot see why we must wait while he calls on orphans." "Because it is nearly Christmas, and he will not be in town to see it done on that day," Georgiana replied. "Ah, here he is." Darcy had stepped into the room with Elizabeth on his arm. Elizabeth was to join Georgiana, Richard and Darcy in their carriage, while Jane travelled with the gardeners to assist with the children. "I am afraid I have one more task that needs my attention," he said. "I will be no longer than 5 minutes. Has our cousin arrived?" "No, but he knew you would be busy this morning and likely adjusted his time accordingly." It was not like Richard to be late for an appointment, nor was it like him to arrive early when there were people such as Miss Bingley whom he wished to avoid. Georgiana was curious to see how he would avoid her while at Netherfield. True to his word, Darcy was only 5 minutes, and had his cousin at his heels when he returned. Richard was in the kitchen, he explained, seeing Georgiana's questioning look. He was pilfering biscuits and teasing the maids. He shook his head but smiled, letting one and all know that he was not displeased. It seems the servants' entrance is not guarded well enough. "Perhaps if your lions roared instead of meowing, they would be more fearsome," Richard quipped, as one of those more friendly than fearsome creatures wound its way around his legs. "They do love you," Georgiana said with a laugh. "It is because he brings them fish," Darcy assured her. "A few scraps each time he calls." "I will not have to smell fish all the way to Hertfordshire, will I?" Georgiana asked Richard. He shook his head and winked at her. "They also appreciate a morsel of cheese now and again." "If you spoil them too much, they shall not catch the mice as they are supposed to do," Georgiana scolded. Richard bent and scratched the ear of the tabby that was still weaving around and through his legs. "They know their duty. We have discussed it, have we not, Hattie?" The cat replied with a meow. "See," Richard said with a laugh. "Are we ready then?" Darcy asked. "We are." Georgiana rose and allowed Richard to help her with her pelisse. "The blankets and foot warmers are waiting in the carriage, as is a tin of biscuits and a few rolls and cheese. Did the children enjoy their gifts, even if they were 2 days early?" "They did," Darcy replied. "Gifts? You were giving gifts to orphans?" Caroline Bingley paused at the door to the sitting room. "No," Darcy said with a shake of his head, as he extended a hand to Elizabeth. "We were giving gifts to children. It is a tradition that I began about 5 years ago, and it is one that Miss Elizabeth and I intend to continue." Georgiana was almost certain that Caroline Bingley was about to swoon as she looked from Darcy to Elizabeth and back. "And why would Miss Elizabeth be carrying on this tradition?" she asked in a strained whisper. "Has your brother not told you?" Darcy made a show of removing Elizabeth's glove from her left hand as Elizabeth blushed and smiled prettily. "Last week, I asked Miss Elizabeth to be my wife. 2 days ago, because I could not wait until we arrived in Hertfordshire to do it, I persuaded her father to accept me. And today, I presented her with my mother's ring." He showed the small gold band inset with diamonds and amethysts to them all. "I had meant to keep it until Christmas, but Master Riley would not be in Hertfordshire to see it, and he will be gone from Mrs. Verity's after Christmas." His smile was broad as he continued. "I have just informed the household to expect a new mistress in the new year." He allowed Elizabeth to replace her glove. "They are assembling to see us off," he said to her softly. "Well, we do not need a send-off," said Richard, looking at Bingley and nodding toward the door to indicate they should leave. Bingley willingly scooted out the door, taking Caroline with him. "Georgie," Richard called from the doorway. "In a moment," Georgiana replied. Richard sighed and leaned against the doorframe to wait. "I know I said this last week at Matlock House, but I am so delighted." She gave Elizabeth a hug, and then turned to her brother and took his hands. "I know I have a parcel tucked away for you in my bag, but this—" She reached over and, taking Elizabeth's hand, placed it on top of her brother's. "This is my Christmas gift." Darcy's brow furrowed, and he glanced at Elizabeth, who merely shrugged and shook her head, letting him know that she was just as confused as he. "You saved me from misery when you arrived in Ramsgate," Georgie explained, "and when I saw you return from Netherfield in such a state of despondency, I vowed I would find a way to save you from misery. A different sort of misery to be sure, but misery just the same." She squeezed the hands that she held wrapped in her own. "I had thought it would be more challenging. I had considered scheming my way to Hertfordshire and pleading your case with Miss Elizabeth." She shook her head. "I did not know if I could succeed in sparing your heart from being broken, but I knew I had to try in some small way to repay you for how you have cared for mine." She released her hold on their hands. "I am pleased that it has worked out as it has." She expelled a breath as her brother wrapped her in his embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, and kissed the top of her head. "I could not ask for a better gift." She placed a gloved hand on his cheek. "No, you could not," she replied with an impertinent grin. He rolled his eyes and laughed as she left the room. "Are you ready to be greeted by what will soon be your new household staff?" he asked Elizabeth, as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "Your sister?" she said as another tear slid down her cheek. "She is rather wonderful, is she not?" Elizabeth nodded. "Come, we must go," he said, drying her eyes with his handkerchief. "There are celebrations and a new life awaiting us in Hertfordshire." He cupped her face in his hands. "There truly is no better gift she could have given me," he said before bending to kiss her softly. Elizabeth could not agree more. Darcy's love was the best Christmas gift she could have ever received, and every year from that one forward, in addition to gifts being exchanged on Christmas morning in the Darcy home, gifts of the heart would be given as well. But these gifts, these special gifts of love, would neither be given nor received on Christmas morning, but would always be shared, just as Georgiana's had been, 2 days before Christmas. This has been 2 Days Before Christmas, Darcy Family Holidays, Book 1, written by Leanie Brown, narrated by Christopher, an authorised voice replica. The 2017 copyright for 2 Days Before Christmas is held by Leanie Brown, all rights reserved.